Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Care Partner training from Insight Memory Care Center. Insight Memory Care Center is a nonprofit organization providing specialized care, support, and education for people living with dementia, as well as their family members and the community. We are excited to have Dr. Turner with us today to present our March Care Partner training. Dr. Robert W. Turner II is an assistant professor in the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership, with a secondary appointment in the Department of Neurology at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. He is a health disparities researcher with ethnographic and mixed methods training. His current National Institute on Aging funded award examines psychosocial and neurocognitive risk and protective factors, accelerated cognitive aging, and mild traumatic brain injury among former NCAA Division I and former NFL athletes. This line of research encompasses understanding how traumatic injury as an occupational hazard hinders daily living and career planning over the life course. These are many of the same concerns faced by military personnel returning from war. Today's topic is contributing to dementia research. And thank you for being here, Dr. Turner. I will hand it over to you. Oh, and I'll also mention to everyone, if you have questions, please do enter them in the Q&A, and we will convey those to Dr. Turner in a little while. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so very much for having me. I'm going to share my screen, and I plan on speaking about a half an hour, maybe just a little bit shorter or somewhere around there. And hopefully I can leave some time open for Q&A. And I'm going to just, I'm sure people here have lots of background insights on caregiving, but I don't know exactly who's in the audience. So I will give some brief background on that as well. So let's just dive into it. Oops, now that's a whiteboard. I'm not trying to get a whiteboard, so I don't know what happened there. Let's try this again. Here we go. All righty. Hopefully you can all see my slides, and we will just dive right into it. But today I'm going to talk specifically about my project, Black male caregivers of a person with dementia or other cognitive impairments. So let's see here. All right, there we go. So just a little bit about me, about my background. You've heard a little bit, but I'm a former professional football player. I was fortunate enough to play in the old USFL as well as the Canadian Football League and the NFL. My training is advanced training in medical sociology with mixed method background. And I also have advanced training in neurocognitive aging and dementia across the life course. And as she just mentioned, I'm the principal investigator on a number of different projects, and which the one we will talk about today is the Black male caregiver study. And then also I have a health initiative on dementia and caregiving. So, just so you have a point of reference, but what is caregiving? It's based on CDC and other other organizations. It's loosely means attending to other person's health needs and well-being. And it often includes, and specifically, lots of challenges around including and taking care of other people, one or more people's activities of daily living, everything from bathing and dressing. And I just want to mention that I am, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on today, but I am a caregiver for my dad who has Alzheimer's disease. It's considered moderate stages. And so he needs some help with his activities of daily living. And as you can also see, there's multiple instrumental activities of daily living, such as paying bills and shopping and using transportation, of which my dad no longer is able to do any of those on his own. So that's the level of care that we provide. So just kind of going back to what we were talking about before, if you look at what the Alzheimer's Association says, and the portion of caregivers, people with dementia or Alzheimer's disease or other dementias versus regular caregiving of older people. So you can see with the dark purple there, when you're looking at people who are caring for a person with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, you're looking at about getting them in and out of beds and chairs. It's about 45% to 33%. little bit more is needed from a caregiver of an Alzheimer's dementia patient when it comes to getting dressed or bathing and feeding. And it just starts to, the distance is quite big when you're looking at getting to and from the toilet, as well as dealing with incontinence. So it's very specific in terms of, and a little bit more demanding, and people would say that it's stressful depending on the types of care that you have to give. In 2022, over 11 million people provided care for or unpaid care for someone, a loved one with dementia. And that, if you look at the amount of money, is unbelievable. 18 billion hours, and which comes up to about $340 billion in care. 66% of caregivers live with the person who they're providing unpaid care for. And 41% of caregivers have a household income of $50,000 or less annually. And anyone who is providing care knows that even things like being able to send a loved one, have a little bit of respite where a loved one is able to attend a adult daycare is very, very challenging, can be very challenging with lower incomes of $50,000 or less. And let's talk a little bit about the unequal burden of dementia care. Disadvantaged and marginalized populations, underrepresented populations, racialized populations are more vulnerable to be affected by Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. Black Americans, for example, are 2 times more likely to develop or be diagnosed with dementia compared to white Americans, but are also less likely to receive timely and accurate diagnosis. And we all know that when you receive your diagnosis, it really has a huge impact on the quality of care or the type of care that might be available to you. So compared with white caregivers, Black caregivers are more likely to provide more than 40 hours of care per week. So when you're caring on that level, that also places demands and makes it much more difficult to be able to be in the workforce. So we know that if people are providing care for 40 hours or more, oftentimes they have to remove themselves from the workplace. So we're also looking at stigma and barriers that are discussed in the literature, cultural and gender expectations, society perspectives of caregiving. Caregiving, as we know, is historically done by women. So these are some of the things that we have found that when it comes to Black males are deterrents to even seeing themselves or using the terminology about being a caregiver. Black men also lack a supportive networks. They in the literature talks about their reluctance to use informal or formal support systems and resources due to a lack of representation. They don't feel as though oftentimes when they do reach out for help that the other person that's there can understand kind of their cultural and I guess you could say racial kinds of differences and needs, and so may not be able to relate to them much. Again, going back to the social stigma, often caregivers of a person or people with dementia face discrimination and challenges navigating the healthcare system. And then there's the role constraints, particularly around being a man, but balancing healthcare responsibility with other commitments results in a high level of stress and time, as well as financial strain. And if you are thinking or believing yourself as being the person that's supposed to be the breadwinner of the family, then it becomes maybe even more depressing or challenging emotionally if you feel as though you're not living up to those cultural or gender norms and expectations. And just in terms of my work and why we look at Black male caregivers and some of the statistics around there, but Black male caregivers as a group are most likely to feel burdened in their role. Black male dementia caregivers are about 3.3 times more likely to experience financial burden than other caregivers, other genders and races of caregivers. Black caregivers as a whole are often tasked with extra hours of caregiving responsibility, including helping with those recipients with those ADLs, which again, as an example, when my mom was sick, and as a man or male, I was responsible for bathing her and cleaning her, which took some real adjustments, both on her part to feel vulnerable in front of her son that way, but then on my part as well. And so those are things that can contribute to some of the different areas of stress and those things that are accustomed that are experienced by a Black male. So we know about plenty of support resources that are available. I always do a lot of work. My work is supported greatly by the Alzheimer's Association, but I feel as though they are one of the better places to turn to for the types of resources that are necessary. But there are plenty of resources in your local communities, depending on where you live, statewide, countywide, some of the churches and other great nonprofits like we're hearing right now. Those are all places that we've learned that the biggest thing that caregivers can do is reach out and not be isolated, so that way they know that they're not alone in what they're doing. And so this is some of the different things that we share, and I've learned myself that I've called and embraced and gotten help in one of my local churches that I'm involved with. They have a support care group for all people of color, and I've joined that and have felt that it has really helped me. As my life has changed and transitioned, as I try to juggle taking care of my dad, both here in New Jersey where he lives, but then I'm also in Virginia, where I work at George Washington University in DC. So just knowing that there are people that you can call on any different levels of support that you might need, and being willing to, step out, and I guess in this instance, being understanding about the vulnerability it takes to be able to ask for help. So when we're talking about, and these are the things that I've learned for myself, but what the literature talks about, when you are looking at caring for people with dementia, it's important to try to keep a routine. I very much found that with my dad, such as bathing and dressing and eating at the same time each day. And we know that life gives you lots of different challenges, so those are not easy to do for some people, but that routine is really important. Help a person write down to-do lists, appointments, depending on the stage that they're at, and even keeping things like an event book or notebook or calendar. We have certainly, in my household, learned that it's very, very important to write things down on the calendar. My dad experiences, we have to make sure that we are checking his blood pressure and his heart rate on a daily basis. So we have a calendar book to make sure that we do that. We also consider a system or reminders for helping those who must take medications on a daily basis. There are things like pill boxes with the calendar and those kinds of things. But there's also some electronic things that people are turning to nowadays by apps on the phone and on their smartwatches and those kinds of things. And then this is something that I've had to learn also when dressing and bathing. Allow the person to do as much as they possibly can, because there's a lot of respect and dignity in that. But then also help and speak to them through this whole process of what you're doing, and make it kind of as much as interactive and fun as we're doing something together as possible. So this is just things that I personally learned a little bit, but also in doing my research, it's and we much of the research is around with focus groups and interviews, and these are things that people are finding that are challenging, but then also ways to help alleviate some of the stress that's or burden that's associated with caregiving. Um, Also, just some other practical applications of things that I have certainly seen firsthand why this is important. But buying loose fitting, comfortable, and easy to use clothing with elastic waistbands. My dad is a former Marine. He really loves dressing up. He's used to wearing belts and those kinds of things, but taking that belt on fast enough and getting it back on afterwards, those are some real challenges. And so sometimes for us, we talk about and we figure out how to use elastic waistbands. Also, sometimes I've learned with my dad, we'll talk about this a little bit, but even fabric softener and the feel of the fabric on the skin and how it can be irritating, or those other things can be really important, because my dad no longer possesses the ability to express verbally, orally, some of the things that he's going. So I have to look for his other cues, the way he moves, scratches, and those other things to try to figure out what's happening. So, making those clothes as comfortable and fitting as possible and easy and feels good on his skin is really important. I've noticed this with large zippers. And for his jacket, my dad, again, I will tell dad, you don't have to zip up today. But yet, because of so much of his life, he's used to dressing that way um, that he makes sure that he wants to do that. So I step in and try to help him and make sure that we can. You may all know about using sturdy shower chairs to support a person who may be unsteady. You can buy those at drugstores, medical supplies, those kinds of things. Um, Probably, again, in doing so much of the research where we're talking about across so many different types of racial and ethnic identities and groups that people come from, the thing that you hear over and over again with working with older adults is about respect and being gentle and recognizing that you have to meet them where they are, use the kind of language and speak with them. And no matter how challenging it is, which we know that can be very challenging to care for someone, as their mood and personalities and behaviors change. Um, but I have learned, even within speaking with my dad, that what are his triggers where he feels that he's disrespected, and how do I make sure that I come up with different strategies to let him know that I still see him as my dad, as a father, as someone who deserves full respect, and allow him to make the decisions in the capacity that he's capable of doing without stepping in and just kind of challenging his dignity in that way. Again, I've also learned very much serving meals as a consistent time, familiar place, and give the person enough time to eat. Another thing that I want to express in terms of when we think about caring for people with dementia or other memory care issues, or cognitive issues, something as simple as, we know that familiarity, furniture, and all that. But remember, people have, your homes have a certain type of smell they're used to, right? It's in the air, it's in the fabric, it's in the curtains, and how the foods that you cook. When you move people from those environments, and it's all new to them. Those are things that make it really difficult. So consistency and allowing people to remain in the home or wherever they can be, for all of those things that would help reduce anxiety or keep it down as low as possible, because these are things that we don't normally think about, things that we take for granted, but things that can help people feel more comforted in their own environment. And so here's what 5 tips that I like to really focus on, excuse me, and make sure people think about when they are, taking care of other people. Again, I'm borrowing from the Alzheimer's Association, but I've seen and heard other people share these types of ideas in focus groups that I've been involved with, or being involved with support groups, and even talking to kind of those um, geriatricians who are helping me in terms of figure out how to best manage the care of my dad, and when I've talked to other people in our studies. But one is about managing your level of stress, right? And how that I've been able to do that with my dad, which I found is very, very important, is instead of trying to have dad try to understand the world as we see it, and and I guess through the regular cognitive process, I try to meet dad wherever he is, right? So it's less stressful trying to share with him, like, dad, it's daytime, or dad, it's night, or something like that, or something, try to correct where he might be thinking. Just say, hey, that's okay. It's really not that important. Wherever he is, however he's experiencing things, and it's his reality, we'll work within that. That reduces my stress, reduces his stress, and we basically have a much better time that way. And then be realistic, right? Be realistic about where they are, what they're doing, what they can and cannot do, the changes that happen with people as they are changing, and their cognitive ability is changing. One, this is an example. People, may become less mobile over time. that requires you to have to figure out solutions in the home as to how do you compensate for that loss of mobility. So those are just things that you have to kind of think through. Also know that as caregivers, right, that no matter how hard it is, no matter what's going on, all you're doing is you do your best. You do the best that you possibly can. Don't beat up yourself. It's very difficult, but sometimes you want to second guess, but don't recognize that, if you're coming from a place of love and care, and these are things, again, both from my own personal experience, but being involved in support groups, hosting focus groups, doing lots of research in the community. This is really kind of what I've heard from people. Also, make sure that you can give yourself some breaks, and then accept the changes again as they occur. Like we talked about, being mobile and then slowing down and lack of mobility. Those are, you know, it's very difficult at times because you don't want to see this disease progress, but it does progress. And so you have to take it kind of as much in strategy you possibly can. Um, Again, just more health care tips for caregivers, making sure I'm going through a situation we have in our home, a home health aide who's has some challenges with her health, but and we tell each other all the time, we cannot help support each other, take care of my dad unless our own health is really looked after. And so, even though she works for us, I want to make sure that I give her the time that's necessary to go see her doctors, make sure that she takes care of all of the other issues that she may or may not be experiencing, and understanding what her mental health support needs to be. In my case, we recognize you can't do it on your own. We're fortunate enough to have some additional resources available that we can afford to have a live-in home health aide because of my busy work schedule. So these are all these things that I can't do it alone. Couldn't help it. So I said, where are some of the solutions that we can turn to? And then probably the biggest thing that I've heard about everything in my research, everything in my daily life, everything in interacting, engaging with caregivers is how important it is to engage in your own social relationships. It can be quite isolating to be alone taking care of someone 24 hours a day. Whatever it may be, some people will find that they can get respite care so that way they can go to church every weekend, right? Or whatever it is that you need to make sure that you do. You need to make sure that you go get your hair done, the beauty salon, or anything else like that. When working with people, it's important that, again, not only is there have to be a routine for the individual that is struggling, a person with dementia or Alzheimer's or other things, but you as a caregiver, you have to have some of your own routine, some of the other things that allow you to escape or help you feel like a whole individual. Don't forget to build those in, or try to find ways to get support so you can maintain as much of a semblance of normalcy for your own life as possible. All right, so talk a little bit about, and this is something that I've really heard a lot about in terms of in the caregiving space by doing interviews and speaking to people across different racial and ethnic backgrounds, is that we know that you want to you care, anyone who is going to take the time to care for someone, a person that needs you, you want to leave a legacy of care. To me, it's very important with my dad. You can see he's a former Marine. As I mentioned, he's a very proud guy. My dad was also really, really active. He was my first football coach, my first coach of any kind of sport. He coached all of my brothers and sisters. Very much, very active in the community on every level. My dad was a ordained minister and a deacon in Episcopalian church. Ran the youth ministry there. He gave so much back in so many different ways. And for me to care for him in the way and just love him again, giving back to him in these years of his life when he is vulnerable and needs it the most. That's probably to me, is the biggest thing that I could do, is honor him as an individual and his legacy of life, of all that he's been able to give by caring for him, right? And I'll tell you the other thing for me personally that has been amazing is that, my dad is always, as I mentioned, he's my first coach, my first teacher. He taught me how to do so many different things. And he's teaching me how to age, teaching me what it means to age with respect and dignity, and and to hold your head up, and recognize that as life changes and things change for you, there's a great way to do it gracefully. And he's just a loving, caring guy. And so part of the legacy that I've been able to create, or I hope to create, and just meeting my dad where he is, when I have to wake him up in the morning and get him ready for his adult daycare, we've come up with a routine that includes playing. My dad graduated high school in, I believe it was 1958. And so one of the things that I did there was looking at what were the top hits in 1958 when he was graduating high school, that was so important to him. And so we wake up in the morning and I put on YouTube and I put the videos on, I put the music on, and we laugh and we dance and we joke, and I give him a bath in the morning together. He wakes up at a time with something that's very familiar and takes him back to all of those emotions that he had at the best times of his life. And so I've been able to incorporate that into caring for him, and we bond over that. And sometimes we'll just be driving down the street when I'm taking the adult care, take care of bringing him back, and he'll just start saying Duke, 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 Duke of Earl, because that was something that we listened to earlier in the morning, and we laugh and we joke and we smile about it, and it helps our day, go along. So it's finding where he is living in that space, and showing him the dignity, as I was mentioning, and recognizing that, yes, even though there are challenges with caregiving, um, it is such an honor for me personally to, just live with my dad, just be around him. And I'll just share another thing in terms of that legacy, in terms of that connection, and what I've experienced with him, recognizing how difficult it was for me to have to bathe him in the beginning. But that human touch, me just feeling his skin, him feeling my skin, us holding each other's hand, um, that connection and that bond has allowed us to grow even stronger, and it makes me feel so much more connected to my dad. So it's been a wonderful journey so far, learning how to care for him allowing me to care for him, and us walking through this time in our lives together. And so I just want to spend the last few minutes before my talk is done, my time with you is done, and open it up to some questions. But I want to talk a little bit about my personal caregiving research, and how I've been approaching this in the DMV and out in the community. And one of the reasons that I decided to do this is because most caregiving research has primarily focused on women. And if you look at the numbers, it's just of all people who have been involved with research on any level around dementia, it's primarily been women, and primarily been much more white women than black women or any other thing. Us men, we really haven't embraced that, and we need to understand what are specific risk and protective factors around our own health and giving care, and those other things. And so that's why I thought, we really need to learn more about this population. So people of color, and particularly men of color, are often not included in dementia research. And as I mentioned, and including all populations, is key to effective interventions of all kinds. So we need to have much more inclusive research, so we understand what are the specific needs that in all groups of people, and I mean well beyond just race as well, trying to understand what people's needs are when they're giving care. So the project that I'm running is called the Black Male Caregiver Research Project, and as you can see there, it's the first of its kind of the projects and it seeks to understand how caring for those with dementia or any other kind of cognitive impairment, how it impacts Black men. In particular, what we're looking at is how does it impact your neurocognitive functioning, your memory, your day-to-day functioning, your activities of daily living. And then we want to look at issues around physiological stress and how is that stress affecting your body, right? And so what we do, men can be compensated. They can complete the whole thing from their own home. That was one thing that we thought was very, very important, right? Because to get caregivers, they already have so many demands on their lives. So we had to come up with a way to allow them to be able to participate from their own home. We also wanted to recognize that people have many, many different financial, situations in their home. Some people, they, every dollar that they have is important, and so time they take away from anything, they need to be compensated. And other people, the money is not important. They want to just be able to provide to help us with it within the community. So we make sure that we compensate everybody for being involved. And this is an example of the flyers that we submit to everyone. And so we've been out in the field now. We first started right at the end of COVID, and we've been out in the field. And some of the things that we've learned in terms of our program, our goal was to get 80 individuals to participate in the study. 40 men who are caregivers of a person, informal caregiving of a person with Alzheimer's, dementia, or other cognitive impairments, and then comparing them with 40 men who do not provide care, Black men in the DMV area. And the eligibility requirements are such that they have to be 30 years of age or older. And I think the oldest we have is up to about 85 years old. So far, we're just about done in the field. So far, we recruited 34 caregivers and 41 non-caregivers. Our goal, we would love to be able to complete that with 40 caregivers, but all we need is just one more to make that our sample representative of the number of men statistically to be able to compare the two groups. So we're out in all over the place. And if there's anyone in the DMV area that that's on this call, if you know of a Black man who's providing care, we certainly would love to speak with them, and hopefully they would be able to join into our study. But we're just about wrapping it up. I expect that we should probably be out of the field by the end of April as we collect everything that we need to, and then be able to delivering some results. And one of the things and how we've gone about doing this that we just want to mention real quickly here is that we work with the faith community significantly in order for them to help us try to find individuals both as caregivers as well as non-caregivers. And so we started this whole process by going off and starting with a listening tour, just trying to understand what's going on in the community. What could faith leaders tell us about the needs of their community, members in their community, what have their experience been with caregivers and people as they age. And then as part of that, we encourage faith leaders, and we've had great um, results with faith leaders themselves getting into the study, because we wanted them to be able to share as stewards back into the community. What does it mean to be in a research project? What was required of them? What do we ask of them? And then after they go back and they've invited us to have dinners and lunches and come speak from the pulpit about this, or come speak in other community events. The community members become aware of the research project, and they've heard it from a trusted voice, and then been willing to get involved with ourselves. So I've worked together with Dr. Lamont Williams, who's helped me get out into the community. And so this is just a kind of an overarching model that we use in order to have make sure that people know that we're not helicopter researchers flying in, grabbing research, helping build our own communities or our own information, fulfilling the needs of the grant. We're really much more looking to be embedded into the community as resources for the community to help them in these areas, because ultimately the research that we do and is funded the way it is, it needs to filter back to the community as a resource to help people understand about the challenges of caregiving that's happening and taking place in their own community. Right. And so as I close, I just wanted to be able to give you some preliminary results that we have found so far from our study of non-Hispanic Black men who are unpaid caregivers and comparing their results to the non-caregivers in our community. And so what we've seen is, just as we kind of predicted, those men who are providing unpaid care for a person with dementia or some other type of cognitive impairment, they have higher rates of depression symptomology, right? So that means they're at greater risk for depression. And we need to find out the root causes of why that is, and then think about what are the support mechanisms that we need in place to address those areas of significant risks of depression, right? And then we've also seen, which makes sense as well, there's greater sleep dysfunction, so which may be tied directly to or could be a result of the depression symptomology. But these are things that, again, if left untreated, undiagnosed, can have a negative impact in your overall health outcome, right? And then the other thing about memory is we've seen that those who provide care compared to those who are not caregivers. We see verbal short-term and as well as working memory difficulties, which tends to make sense, particularly on the verbal short-term because of the sleep dysfunction. It's harder to find the words when you're sleep deprived, right? But then there's also some long-term working memory difficulties that can be associated with giving care. And so this is, we need to next steps understand kind of, can we identify the existing profiles or what it is about caregiving in the DMV with people are actually experiencing that are leading to these kinds of outcomes? How do we develop interventions? What resources does the community already provide so that way people can address these issues? What resources are available through nonprofit or other organizations? How do you find the time to get that? Do you have a case management worker that can help you with this so that way you can address some of your own health issues? So these are all the things that we are looking into. We have lots of other ways that we want to talk about our results, again, both in terms of the physical outcomes, the stress, as well as the neurocognitive outcomes, so that way we can have stronger and healthier communities. So at that, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to now open it up for questions, and I have, I'd love to be able to engage with you for the next few minutes, in any way that you would like me to answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Turner. Yes, if anyone is listening and has questions, please do enter them into the Q&A, and I'd be happy to relay them to Dr. Turner. And I just wanted to say to you, Dr. Turner, thank you so much for sharing some of your personal experience and your journey with your father. And I loved so many of the tips that you were sharing about things that you learned that helped your dad and help you, and the honor that you have of being able to provide care for your father at this time of need in his life. So I just found that very moving, and I appreciate that you shared that. And thank you for all the work that you're doing on the research side, of course, with Black male caregivers, and making sure that everyone is represented and that their needs are recognized and that there's more information and programs available to serve everyone who's in need. I don't see any questions coming up in the chat, but I will just briefly pull up Insight's contact information in case someone thinks of something later and you'd like to contact us at Insight. We are always here for you, happy to take your questions and to get answers and to make sure that you have the education and support that help you as a family caregiver. You can reach us at Insight at 703-204-4664. You can email us at imcc@insightmcc.org or find us online at insightmcc.org. This webinar will also be archived on our website in just a few days' time, so you can refer to it later or share it with another person. And in particular, please, if you know someone who might be a good candidate for Dr. Turner's study, particularly a Black male caregiver, please do review his contact information and reach out to him as soon as you are able to get involved in that initiative. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Turner, for being here with us today and sharing your expertise. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. See you next month.
Thank you. Bye-bye.